Welcome to another episode of Comedy Wham Presents, and welcome to the 2021 Summer Vacation Series. We're getting to know comics from around the world who performed on our Isolation Comedy online show in 2020. I'm your host, Valerie, and sometime co-host Ms. Purrington will join us if she damned well pleases. ComedyWham.com is your place to go for features about all Austin comedy and those beyond. You can keep up with us on Twitter and Instagram at Comedy Wham, or on our Comedy Wham Facebook page. In addition to podcasts, Comedy Wham brings you articles, album reviews, live shows, and an events page for live shows in Austin and Houston. If you're a comic in those cities and want your show featured on the calendar, go to the events page and click Submit a Show to complete the short survey. Now let's get back to our podcast. Launched in 2016, the Podcast Project brings you funny people and their stories. As a fan, I like to delve into a comic's background and motivations, and will usually take a detour along the way. Consider the interview a way for you to get to know the folks that make the Austin, check that, global comedy scene the best. If you like this podcast, please rate and review us. Today, we are headed to Sacramento, California. We're speaking with someone who got a start as a punk ska kid and then graduated, of all things, to stand-up comedy. And among his comedy credits are opening for Norm Macdonald, Robin Williams, and Doug Stanhope. He headlined the very first China International Comedy Festival in Shanghai. He's got an amazing 8 comedy albums available for you to listen to, with amazing titles like Bad Comedy for Bad People, Elf Orgy, Atheist Christmas, Cats Made of Rabbits, and his latest, Not For Rehire. He's the author of the book Punching Nazis and Other Good Ideas, a book that the Washington Post called hilarious, a demented masterpiece. He's got an eponymous podcast, which I tried to pronounce and say before we hit record, and it is a tongue twister, even though it's just his name. And he is one of our favorite comics of our 2020 Isolation Comedy online show, though I do have to admit that sometimes his daughter did steal the show. And now Comedy Wham presents our guest, Keith Lowell Jensen. Hi.
Hello.
That's a pretty impressive list of accomplishments.
It's always nice hearing someone else. You know, you feel like you haven't done anything. Yeah. Someone else reads something like that. You're like, oh, I did a few things. All right, that's nice.
You did a lot of things. I had to scale this down. And I print all of this stuff, and I'm like, I had to cut some of my template to fit everything in. So you've done quite a lot. Well, Keith, it's great to have you here on the podcast. I'd like to start with a formal icebreaker question.
All right.
One word to describe your past.
Oh, wow. One word. I mean, I'm old. That's a lot of past to describe in one word. To describe my past, well, varied.
I'll take it, because I think that's very accurate. Now, you are in Sacramento, California today. Is that where you have always been? Were you raised there?
No, I grew up in Corona, California, which is down in Riverside County, not too far from Los Angeles.
Okay.
I grew up there until I was 14, and then my parents moved with me and my little brother up to Roseville, California, which is a suburb of Sacramento. Leaving behind my 3 older brothers. So it was a really big change. The family kind of split in half. The older brothers went out on their own. And and I moved to what was, I mean, I felt like I had moved to Andy Griffith's Mayberry. Roseville just seemed like such a little hick town. I literally walked down Main Street to find, the little market. But luckily they had video games. That was like the one saving. I was like, video games within walking distance. Okay, I can live here.
Yeah, that's
but it was a really big change.
That's as essential as milk for a teenage boy is access to video games.
And it was like when Atari had become outdated and
Oh,
Nintendo Entertainment System hadn't hit yet. So it was
uh-huh.
that period where video games at home weren't really a thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, you really needed somewhere to go plunk your quarters in.
Yeah. So a family of 5 boys, did I catch?
5
Wow.
boys.
Oh, the
Yeah.
probabilities.
I'm probably the most hyperactive of the bunch, but I have no doubt that all 5 of us would qualify as ADHD. So
Well,
that added a twist.
One of the things that I like to learn is, like, was comedy a part of your life growing up? And it's not necessarily did you watch comedy, but was it just part of your life? And when I think of a large family, I automatically assume there has to be hysterics and comedy, just the inherent nature of 5 boys.
Yeah, it's funny when you have so many siblings, everyone has to kind of find their role. And mine definitely wasn't, the funny one. I was the artistic one. I was the one that had the oil paints and wrote poetry. And my brothers got mad because I could get away with putting nudes on my wall and they couldn't, because their nudes, came out of Playboy, and my nudes were artistic. They were, basically the same thing for the same purpose, but mine were in black and white. I remember my mom explaining to them, what keeps our art? I'm behind them going like, ah. But yeah, I think my brothers were surprised when I went into comedy, because I was not. I actually, when I was really young, hated to be laughed at. If I walked into a wall or something, and it was really the difference between laughing at or laughing with. I didn't mind if you laughed at a joke I made, but I was very sensitive about feeling like I was being laughed at. So
yeah, that's such a funny thing to hear, the whole notion that, for you got away with having the nudes on the walls because you painted them. That, to me, that captures a lot of your essence. Like, you just you kind of subvert the system in a very sly way, not, in your face, although I guess that's a play on words. So you wanted the nudes in your face probably as a teen boy, but the whole notion of a redirect is great, because I'm thinking about your book, and I was watching Not For Rehire this morning, and that was kind of the subtle art that you have is just that turn, that slow turn, that subversive thing that you do.
You use the word slow, and it's, my comedy does, I take my time, and I worry about that. Although you just got to be true to yourself and do what you're doing. But we are in an age of short bits of Twitter and TikTok, and I do my best on those things as well. And I've really worked hard on learning to do one-liners and learning to do short things. But really, I'm a slow burn kind of guy. I'm, even when people tell me they're going to watch Not For Rehire, I'm like, please give it at least 10 minutes. Like, I don't jump right in. I slowly set it up. And and years of like telling myself I wasn't going to do that. With every special, I'm like, I'm going to jump right into jokes this time. But it's just, I like to set things up towards a big finale. Yeah.
And with 8 albums under your belt, you've figured out who you are, it seems.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go back and rewind back to not necessarily the childhood, but how you were very big into punk and ska music, and you were a musician first. Is that? But you weren't. I was reading an article that said, one of your bandmates left the band to be a dad, and you were trying to figure out, well, what do I do now? And you didn't feel like you qualified for any of the other band positions. So you just your default was to go to stand up.
Yeah, I don't really play an instrument. I can find my way around a harmonica, and I know a couple of chords on the guitar, but I've never been good at playing them. The band, I found someone who a really talented guitarist, Scott Behringer, who was willing to let me kind of sing my lyrics to him off key, and somehow he would find what I was trying to do in them and help me come up with music for him. Or he would write music and I would take it home and listen to it and then just see what I started singing.
Okay.
And it seemed unlikely that I would find a person that patient again to work with a songwriter who didn't play music. Although I guess it's fairly common, but it's like, I wanted to do more than just write the lyrics. Oftentimes I wrote the lyrics and I had a melody in mind. And, you know, there's the Beavis and Butthead. I don't know if you ever saw it, but in their book, it's like the music to popular songs, but they've written it out, you know, DA space da 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 da. And that's literally how I wrote music. I was like, now right here, go beat you know, and I found someone patient enough to go, okay, let me see if I can figure out what the heck that's supposed to be. You know, and I'm a little tone deaf, so it wasn't even good beatly. And then the other thing was just how much work we put into it. We really promoted the band. We got to where we were gigging. We were, you know, it was a lot of work. And then to have it gone overnight because of someone else left me feeling a little bit powerless. And comedy was something where I could, again, be putting my words out there, be expressing myself in the way that I wanted to and getting the attention that I wanted. For some reason, as a society, we're not keen on saying I love attention, but I do, and I think it's good if you find positive ways to get it. And so that was a common thread. I liked the attention I got in a band. I liked being able to put my words out there, and comedy was a way to do that didn't depend on other people. And even after I started comedy, I'm reading all these comedian biographies, and so many of them had comedy troupes, and I was like, oh, so I should start a comedy troupe. And I did right away. But the first thing I told the troupe was, any one of you quits, we go on without you. This isn't about any one of us as an individual. Just know that. And it's like that experience of the band being taken away from me because Scott had to go be a dad, which is noble. Yeah. But you know, I wasn't gonna do that again. I wasn't gonna make that kind of shaky investment of my time and energy, I guess.
Yeah. And you were still in Sacramento at this time.
Yeah.
Okay. So what kind of comedy scene were you looking at or were you facing when you made that switch?
So I started at a small club here called Laughs Unlimited that at the time was kind of our like B club. Like if the A-listers went to Punchline, the B-listers came to Laughs Unlimited.
Okay.
And a woman named Karen Anderson, who's a brilliant, I think she has a podcast with Doug Benson right now. A brilliant writer. She's written for a whole bunch of the greats. She wrote for Ellen DeGeneres and she wrote with Wanda Sykes. Wow. She taught a comedy class. And so I went and took it. And it kind of helped. I kind of think of it as like training wheels. It kind of gave me the confidence to get up and try stand up. I had already done a lot of public speaking and even something very similar to comedy when I was emceeing the animation festival. But to do it in a comedy club in that environment, the class helped. And the scene was interesting. Sacramento at that time very much had a like in the shadow of San Francisco kind of attitude about itself. So whereas now I think I've got some of the best comedians performing in San Francisco are from Sacramento. I think we've really established our reputation as a solid comedy town, but I don't feel like that had happened yet at that point. Yeah. So it was weird.
So I was reading another article that, and you talked about Johnny Taylor, who we absolutely love Johnny here at Comedy Wham. No, he's okay. Come on. We had him on the online show, and then my friend Laura Smith, she interviewed him for this podcast, and so we're big fans of Johnny. And this article that I was reading mentioned how you did really great your first 6 times, and like you had kind of a little banter about how you always do well your first few times, and then your friends and family stop going to your shows, and that's when you bomb. But it sounds like with your experience with public speaking that you didn't have that barrier to feeling confident on stage. So what got you past the bombing stage?
I wasn't going to quit while I was bombing. If anything, I was at greater risk of quitting during those first 6 shows where I did well. Like I might have gone, okay, cool, I did that and I was good at it. Next, and I was doing really weird stuff. I was very Andy Kaufman influenced, a lot more than people would think, given the comedian I later became. I was putting strainers on my head and performing my whole set as a fly, or doing a bit where I wouldn't come out on stage. I made the MC bring the mic backstage to me because I had stage fright. And, that time I bombed was the first time I told the story. I told like this long, it was my first professional booking too. Like for my 7th time on stage to be a paid booking is unheard of. But I had done so well those 6 times. So then they gave me 5 whole minutes and I did a story I had never told on stage before. And the story was 5 minutes long, which is extremely arrogant and naive of me. And Karen Anderson, my mentor at the time, told me not to. And I was like, I got this, and afterwards she was like, told you. And she was super right. And that scared me off of storytelling for a while,
I'm a super fan. I've done comedy a bit, but I am curious to know why did she tell you, or what is the philosophy behind telling somebody don't do a 5-minute story this early on?
It was less that it was a 5-minute story than that it was untested. Okay. It was do the stuff that got you this gig that's been working really well for you. You're 6 times on stage. Do kind of a greatest hits of that. Don't do some untested thing you've never done.
Okay.
But then also doing a story with your whole 5 minutes is kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. If that story bombs, then you bombed your set.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're doing a bunch of short jokes in 5 minutes, a few of them can bomb and you can recover,
Yeah. You've asked the audience to invest all of this time, and if you don't give them a payoff at the end.
The interesting thing about a story is, even if the story is made up of smaller jokes on the way, which it should be, and those all do well, it still has to end strong. And that's true of any comedy set. You should have a strong closer. But it's even more true of one where you've invested everything in the closer.
Yeah.
If I do a normal set and then my closer doesn't do that great, I can sneak in a quick short closer that I have. And all comedians do that. You see some comedians, they're on their 3rd or 4th attempt to sneak in a closer and have it work. So they can get off the stage. And you're over there lighting them like, get off. But you can't really do that when you've told the 5 minutes of a story, and then the ending kind of goes blah, and then you're like, oh, here's an unrelated thing. It's funny though. So yeah, it's a little bit trickier and a little bit scary.
So did you follow the rules right after that, or did you kind of do that subversive thing until you figured out, oh, but the long story is what I really want to do?
Yeah, it scared me when I followed the rules a little more after that. And then slowly worked my way back up to telling stories, figured out the difference, because that story killed for me at parties. People would say, oh, hey, tell the story about when your brother made you sit in dog poop. Like, it was a popular story for me to tell. And then when many years later, when I got around to recording my first album, I put that story as the closer. And it's the story that the album's named after, To the Moon. So that was kind of, again, where I said I couldn't quit on a fail. I had to quit on a win. Well, I also couldn't even let that story sit there as a fail. I had to eventually score with that story, or else ultimately it was a failure. Now it's a success that had a hard time getting there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a weird obsession of mine. Sometimes I'll keep doing something I don't even like anymore for a really long time, just because like I got to win before I can quit.
Yeah.
And playing a game I don't even like playing. So.
I'm curious, did Karen get to see your winning version?
Oh, I don't know. She moved back down to LA. I should ask her.
Because that's great. It's great if you personally win, but it's great to have somebody who was there.
Right.
When it didn't win, who told you got to follow the rules, but then she gets to see your progress and say, oh my God, you did it. You learned, you You worked
Right.
hard to get to this point. So about how long did it take for you to transition from the spectacle Andy Kaufman-esque style of comedy to the more storytelling? And I'm curious specifically, what did something singular make that change happen, or was it just a gradual, you got your comfort level to migrate to the more storytelling style?
It's interesting. I'm telling you, my 7th time on stage, I tried a story. So
Yeah.
I think I was ready to transition that direction really early on.
Yeah.
And then if anything, it bombing made it take longer, scared me away from it. And so I kept getting kind of more and more experimental. I did a routine years later that I called sketch comedy troupe in a box. And I would literally start on stage with a box on stage that I was in, that I got in before the audience was seated.
Uh-huh.
And then I'd come out of the box and be like, all right, I got a show for you. You know, and it was like trying to do sketch comedy as a single person. It was all like kind of conceptual and weird. And meanwhile, I'm writing a lot. I'm writing short stories, and my girlfriend, now my wife, but for 14 years, you know, my girlfriend, was constantly telling me, you're a storyteller, and trying to ride that line of like respecting me doing what I want to do, but then also her feeling so strongly like, God, you're great at storytelling, and you have a passion for storytelling. You've always wanted to tell stories in different forms. I wanted to be a graphic novelist, and I've wanted to make movies, and I want, you know, all things that center around storytelling. I would go to parties and I would hold court telling stories, or you find that one other person that's a big storyteller and you swap stories. You get a little 2-man show going, or a 2-person show going. So there was a lot of pushing from her as well. Although I don't know if that sped me up or slowed me down, because I'm so stubborn. Her pushing might have made me go, nope, I'm not gonna do it. So
about how many years into performing stand-up did it take before your first comedy album, which I don't have the date for Bad Comedy for Bad People. That's the first, right?
Yeah, I think it's 2009.
Okay.
And I was probably about 10 or 11 years in.
Okay.
So,
and is that representative of your storytelling?
It ends with a 10-minute story. But it probably has a lot more sort of jokey jokes on it than my later stuff.
Yeah.
Really, the purpose of it was to start getting me hours. You know, I wasn't being booked to do hours, and I knew that I could.
Mm-hmm.
So even rehearsing to record that hour, the longest that I got leading up to it was 30 minutes. A friend of mine gave me 30 minutes in a nearby town, a really small, like podunk town where a train went right behind the club. So you'd have to stop in the middle of your set because the building was shaking. And,
oh my gosh.
But, you know, so I had to practice doing an hour in 5, 15, and 1 30-minute installment. But then when it was done, then I could go to bookers like David Tribble or Charter that did these one-nighters all over the place and say, I can do an hour. Here's a CD of me doing an hour. The fact that it was actually a released CD with a nice cover and a UPC code and everything, to me, just made that more persuasive and impressive. But really, I wasn't thinking as much about having merch to sell as I was about just bumping myself up a level in comedy. Because I wasn't doing the club route. I wasn't going to the Punchline. I wasn't. So the Punchline is Sacramento's kind of gatekeeper, where you start getting work in a professional environment. Then you go there every Sunday and you just hang out. And maybe after a year of that, they put you on, and hopefully you do well, or you might have another year of waiting. It's kind of grueling, and I just decided not to do it. In hindsight, probably not one of my best decisions, but it worked out okay for me.
Yeah.
But so recording my own CD and then being like, here's me doing an hour was, I guess, my alternative to that.
So if you were going to do the club route, what was your route?
So I came from being in a band, and this is somewhere where me and Johnny Taylor have a lot in common. I mean, we both have navigated the club route because we realized that that was part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But early on, we both saw this other route as, in my case, someone who'd been in bands, and in his case, someone who'd been a fan of like independent music for a long time, of building your own audience. The clubs is about going and working with the audience they have, because you're usually opening for someone else. It's the crowd they drew, or it's just the club that the crowd drew by giving away free tickets. People wonder why comedy clubs give away so many free tickets. It's like, so you'll come and buy 2 drinks. I mean, that's
the money maker.
Yeah. So yeah, I started a sketch comedy troupe. We performed in an art gallery. I performed at bars. I put on my own show at a local coffee shop. That was going to be my route. And when I built a big enough audience, I figured I'd be undeniable to the clubs and kind of bypass some of that. Oops. And that worked. It just took a lot longer than I thought. Spending my Sunday nights at Punchline hanging out would have sped up my career a lot. And honestly, what are you doing during that time? You're watching some of the best comedians in the world perform. It's not a bad way to spend your time if you're trying to learn how to do comedy. So when young comedians ask me for advice, I always go to Punchline every Sunday. Tell them you're there, and then wait your time. I could have got there quicker that way. But when I did finally get on stage at Punchline, it's because I had independently booked shows, either that I was booking or that friends were booking. And so I was getting on their stage that way anyway, and the booker already knew me. And then I was able to go to her and say, hey, can I get up on a Sunday? And she was like, yeah, why haven't you been coming? And I was like, I have off and on for 10 years. I told her I was shy, which is true. Like off stage, I can be really shy. So I was like, I'm shy when there's not lights on me and a microphone in my hand. And she's like, okay, I relate to that. I'm very shy as well. She's like, all right, we'll try you out.
Oh, wow.
So yeah.
Subverting the system.
Right. But oftentimes subverting the system is just taking a much, much longer circuitous path instead of like the steep climb that's in front of you.
That's right. Painting those nudes was a lot longer than just, ripping the page out of the Playboy.
Right.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because a few episodes back, so Cap City is the comparable. You've probably heard of Cap City in Austin. That's the comparable venue to the Punchline, and
they should probably book me, don't you think?
Well, when they shut down, but then they are coming back, but they're coming back under the Helium umbrella. So
I didn't realize that. I thought they had just shut down temporarily. Okay.
No,
they're not Capital City anymore. Now they're.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to rename. Everybody's for now. They're still, everybody's still referring to them as Cap City.
Okay.
But the conversation that I was having with this person who opened their own room to have, open mics every single night, and they had a real issue with the fact that the only way that you could work Cap is if you showed up every Sunday night at their open mic and you just sat in the back of the room. And it's like, well, how is that making a comic better? Let's give them stage time. Let's have an open mic every night of the week, not just once a week. And so it was very, it was an eye-opening perspective. I acknowledge that was the system, that you have to show up to Cap every Sunday night. And even if you didn't make the list, you got to be in the back of the room.
See, even as I tried to find my way around that system, I don't really object to it, because it makes you stronger by you hang out, you watch other really good comedians. And I think that's part of our craft as well. 2, it's one night of the week. You can still go hit an open mic after and before it. We often did. Yeah. Because we would drive an hour and a half into the city to go to Punchline. So while we're there were late night open mics we could hit, and then there's also Monday through Saturday, where we were out doing stand-up. It's not like it's necessarily the job of every club to build up the people that are brand new. Maybe when you're built up to a certain level, then it's the job of the club to help you with your development from there. Yeah. But I don't think it's realistic for the one big club in town to try to, in that way, help develop every person that just decides they want to try stand-up comedy. And let's face it, half of whom aren't going to keep with it, you know? So, I've seen a few people that have complained about that system, and I don't really object to it because I'm not sure I see how else the club could do it, even as I chose not to participate in it. And I also respect anyone choosing not to participate in it.
Yeah.
You know, or trying to find another way in.
Right. There is no one size fits all instruction manual for a comedy career.
Right.
So did you find that having that album, that hour under your belt, started to finally shake some things loose and things started moving at a better pace for you?
Yeah, I started getting booked for hours.
Yeah.
Which I wanted, or half hours or 45-minute sets. You know, I started getting those longer sets that I wanted. Yeah. And so that was cool. But then the surprise was that I also sold a lot of albums. And I mean, a lot by my standards. I didn't get a gold record or anything. I probably got a cardboard record. But then I started, people liked it, and people liked having, a recording of me. And so that's why I recorded another one pretty quickly after that, which was Cats Made of Rabbits. And also to send it to labels. When I first made it, my goal wasn't necessarily to send it to labels, but then I did because I had it. And then some of the labels were like, hey, we like this. We're not necessarily ready to release it, but keep in touch. Yeah. And once they said keep in touch, I was like, well, then I better make something new. So I have a reason to keep in touch,
Yeah.
So I right away recorded Cats Made of Rabbits, like within, I think, a year and a half.
Yeah. I mean, we're at 2021. Your first album was in 2009. You have 8 records under your belt. That's an impressive track record.
I initially wanted to do one a year.
Whew.
I'm a big Woody Allen fan, as an artist, not as a person.
Okay.
And Woody Allen made a movie a year. The Beatles made 2 albums a year. I was like, yeah, an album a year sounds reasonable. And then I had labels that were like, no, well, we're not doing an album with you every year.
What is your current label? Is it the 800 Pound
Gorilla?
Yeah,
with 800 Pound Gorilla Records, and they're fantastic. I had a lot of problems with my first label that I signed with, and I'm still in hindsight glad that I did, because I probably wouldn't be with 800 Pound Gorilla if I hadn't passed through that other label that shall remain nameless first. But 800 Pound Gorilla, 1, they let me release what I want as often as I want, but 2, they know how to sell a record. Yeah. And they'll say things to me like, hey, if you did a clean album, we have a market for it. But if you don't want to do a clean album, go do a dirty album. We'll release it. We'll do the best we can with it. So I did KLJ Greatest Bits was my first thing with them, and it was clean. And people are like, oh, they pressured you to do a clean album. And I was like, no, they asked me if I wanted to like hit a market that I wasn't hitting. And I was like, yeah, I do. So they've been really cool that way and really supportive. They've allowed me to have what cover art I want, which was a big fight with the other label. They've just kind of treated me like an artist. So.
Yeah. You don't strike me as a not clean comic. So I'm just curious how much of a challenge it was for you to do an all clean album.
I joke about it as if it was a challenge, but it wasn't. Like you said, I mean, I'm not particularly dirty.
Yeah.
So it was just holding out the swears, and the swears can, for a comic. Here's the thing. A lot of comics say the swear is like a sign of nervousness. And if you're dropping the F word constantly, it probably is. It probably is a sign of nervousness. But the fact is, there are jokes that are funnier if you say the curse word than if you say the same joke without a curse word.
Yeah, yeah.
But there are a couple places where, okay, so in Not For Rehire, I described being at the golf course and getting mad at the golfers who are purposely hitting balls into the vehicle I'm driving. And I curse them out. And so when I originally told the joke, I would say the curse words that I said to the golfers when I cursed them out. And then I would also flip them off and I would show people my finger. Well, when I went to do a clean version of that, I said, so I yelled every curse word I knew with them, which at 15 was most of them because we had cable.
Yeah.
And I feel like that ended up being a new joke that was a better joke than me just yelling a bunch of curse words, you know. And then for flipping them off, I said, and as I was yelling, I pointed at, you know, but not like with the traditional pointing finger, and more like up than at them directly. And again, it ended up forcing me to write something that I thought ended up being better. So then even when I was doing a room where I could be as filthy as I wanted, I ended up doing that joke the clean way, because the clean way on that joke worked better. But then there's other jokes that I'm like, no, I'm just not going to do that one clean. That joke's better the way it is. Not even because it has, some jokes that just have such a dirty subject matter. There's just no way to clean them up, and it's pointless to try. But then there's jokes where just that F-bomb just in the right place is just, mwah, you know, it's the spice you need. And there's no point in trying to clean it up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I did watch the Not For Rehire, and I was struck by the artistic elements to that special. The opening was really creative and
cool.
and well done. And I love the notion of your stage background, the boxes with your initials on it. I just thought those are some like really nice little artistic touches. Are those little unstated? And I'll admit I only got through about half an hour of the special so far, so maybe it's something that you do address after, but are these things that you ever address, or is it just it is part of what you want to bring to an audience, is these little artistic touches?
So that's about collaboration. And no, I never addressed the boxes.
Okay.
And we didn't even know what the intro was going to be when we shot the special. So the intro is a brilliant guy named Jason Broussard who directed the special.
Okay.
And he knows I'm a big That 70s Show fan. Again, as comedy, not the people involved. A couple of them turned out to be quite problematic.
Yeah.
But he came to me and was like, what if we had you at different ages dressed for different jobs talking in the basement, you know, around the table like you were having a smoke session? Like, that would be amazing. And so then we actually put a call out for a basement to use, and a friend answered the call, was like, I have a perfect That 70s Show basement. So we did it on location in a friend's basement.
Cool.
There's a bird, a big parrot sitting on my shoulder. It's so weird to me how much people don't notice it.
Yeah.
I'm in the Petco uniform. One of the me's sitting around the table is in a Petco uniform with this big old live parrot on my shoulder.
I can't believe I missed that. I can't believe I missed that.
Somehow people don't notice it. I think because everything's moving very fast.
Yeah.
But the night before we shot, the director was at Target and he saw one of those bird guys, you know, the guys that always have their bird with them. And he went up and he said, hey, I have a really weird favor to ask you. And that guy was like, oh, that would be great. And he shows up the day of our shoot. He didn't charge us anything. He was just happy to have his bird be a star.
Oh, cool.
So, you know, and the bird scared me in the same way that I described being scared of those big birds in the special. I mean, the thing's got a beak. It could have taken my ear right off with very little thought. Oh my God. And then you have the audacity to not even notice.
I know. I feel terrible because I noticed like dumb little things. Like I was watching a TV show the other day, and I was the only one that noticed that it was a sitcom, and I was the only one. There was 3 of us watching, and nobody noticed that throughout the episode they were doing a countdown. And you could see them going from 40, 39, and they were inserting numbers in various scenes as a countdown. And I'm like, that was really cool. But of course, I'm a numbers and math person. So of course,
What sitcom? Now I'm intrigued.
It was How I Met Your Mother.
Okay. That's some sharp writing. That's actually really clever show.
Yeah. And I never wanted to watch the show, but I was convinced to give it a try. And it took about a season. And now I just, wow, they really do some really cool things with the writing. Yeah. So anyway, so I will rewatch it and I will pay closer attention.
Watch for that bird.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the boxes on stage was another Jason. That was Jason Adair.
Okay.
And he did my last 3 sets.
Huh.
And the first set was, you would have thought we were putting on a play, and that was for Atheist Christmas. It sat like a living room at Christmas time. He even had some snow falling, but the window to the outside, you see snow falling at the beginning. We had a fireplace and a Christmas tree. I wanted it very cozy. When I first come in, I change out of my shoes and into my slippers and take my jacket off,
Or Mr. Rogers.
Yeah. And then the next set was the green stripes and pictures of terrible people throughout history. And he painted them in this garish style and had them laughing. And then for the third set, he came to me with the boxes, and that was a hard sell to the producer and the director. They didn't like his mock-ups of it. But I'm a big Andy Warhol fan, and I remember Andy Warhol with the Brillo boxes, and I knew we could make it look good. I knew Jason wouldn't quit until it looked good. And so I really pushed for it, and I love how it came out.
Because it allows you to do like this cohesive marketing throughout. Like it's just I think it was a very cool idea. I'm glad people pushed for it.
It's kind of satirizing branding, but it's branding. It's
exactly
totally
subversive.
Until this interview, I had no idea I was so subversive. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry.
No, I like it. That's great. It's my new brand. It's gonna be the name of my next album, Keith Lowell Jensen, Subversive.
You then decided that you were gonna tackle writing a book, which as a storyteller and poet, seemed like a very natural step. But your book title is just so great. Punching Nazis and Other Good Ideas. I think
you got it.
And I was reading the Amazon sample.
Yeah.
And I like how you opened up with the whole notion of the trigger warning,
right? And
the zinger at the end about that, and you one of your trigger warnings was that you were going to be naming the 45th president often.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. And it's on Kindle, so I'm going to be actually adding it to my reading list so I can read it, because I liked the writing style, which of course is, if you're a storyteller, you're going to have a good writing style. What pushed you into writing a book?
That's the weirdest thing. So I wrote a collection of short stories that I self-released. What I think I called it Oh Holy Day, and a lot of them centered around holidays. I wrote Not For Rehire originally as a book, and got rejections from a couple of very esteemed publishers. It's so different than comedy, where you can just keep going after those laughs and that reward until you get it. Mm-hmm. To spend months of my life writing something and then not get any feedback except a rejection letter. Wow, that hurts. Yeah. That's so hard to take. And so I thought I wasn't going to make it as a writer just because the process was too painful. I would keep writing, but I wasn't, going to try to publish a book again. And then Richard Spencer got punched in the face on Inauguration Day, and it went viral. And all these debates started about whether or not we should punch Nazis. And I was very outspoken in favor of punching Nazis. I'm also in favor of trigger warnings. Whenever, as a white dude, people are like, oh, he wrote about trigger warnings, I'm like, in favor of them, because I feel like everyone, especially comedians, are all making fun of them. And I'm like, no, it's a good idea. I like when NPR says, hey, the next story is really graphic, so I can decide with my 10-year-old in the back if I'm going to leave it, or 11-year-old now, leave it on or not, I don't know if you can hear her.
There she is. Yeah.
You were 10 at the time that I was thinking of. She is 11. And also clearly listening to me, which is good to know. She could have kept that to herself, and maybe I would have said things that later I'd regret. So my friend Carrie Poppy, who does the podcast Oh No, Ross and Carrie, which is a great kind of like Mythbusters of woo, like They are like a skeptics podcast. She got approached to write a book by Skyhorse. And she wasn't in a position where she wanted to do that, but she says to them, you should have Lowell Jensen write a book. And it's so weird to me that this is how I got a book deal.
Wow.
They said, what would he write about? And she said, punching Nazis. And they said, oh, that's hot right now.
Oh my gosh.
So I get this letter saying, we hear you have a manuscript called Punching Nazis. And I wrote back and I was like, one, no. But here's something I did write. And I actually sent them Not For Rehire. And they wrote back and they said, we like your writing style. This is very funny. We want the Nazi punching book. And then they offered me a really attractive advance for it. And I went, I could write a Nazi punching book.
Yeah.
So I suggested the title Punching Nazis and Other Good Ideas. One, because I think it's funny. And two, because the and other good ideas means I could be a little more broad.
Yeah.
And so the book ends up being about everything from my social justice warrior politics to stories about the punk rock scene in the late 80s and early 90s, which was very plagued with white supremacists and Nazi skinheads in Sacramento and even in the San Francisco Bay Area. And a few interviews. I interviewed the bass player for the band Cimarip, a ska band that did the song Skinhead Moonstomp, and interviewed him about how cool skinheads were. These awesome non-racist skinheads in the early scene. The whole skinhead thing got co-opted. Interviewed comedian Kate Gary, one of my favorite comedians, about her status as the Trump slayer. She really, the minute Trump got elected, she got branded. And when I'm sorry, my mind is blanking right now. The Kathy Griffith.
Oh yeah, Kathy, yeah.
Holding Trump's head. I was like, she's got nothing on Kate. For one, Kate would never have apologized. So yeah, it was cool. It was a really fun experience. It was also a terrifying experience because they'd given me that advance, and I didn't really have faith in myself that I could write the book. And so or that anyone would get my style. I'm so influenced by graphic novels and by zines. Jeffrey Comet Bus is one of my favorite writers. So it was going to be short and all over the place. And some of the stories weren't going to have real clear plot lines. They were just going to be little slices of life that seemed to be acceptable in graphic novels. But I was like, will they get that in this other format? And the editor, as soon as she read it, she asked me if I knew Aaron Comet Bus. And I was like, I'm a huge fan. And she's like, not in a way that's derivative, but I can see that this is kind of in the same wheelhouse. And I was like, yes, she gets me, knows what I'm, because that's the biggest part. It's like, not only is it good, but will they get what you're doing? Sometimes if someone doesn't enjoy something, it's often that they just don't get where you're coming from. And so and if you're
putting out volumes of content to people, whether it's having a good rapport with the record label who can support you in different ways, to knowing that there are small publishing houses and it's not just Simon and Schuster and the big publishing houses who just have to be machines, knowing that you found a smaller publishing house that truly gets you and your influences, that's pretty cool.
But that's the problem. I didn't do that. Skyhorse is a very big publisher.
Oh, okay.
And she got me.
And
then before the book even came out, she got let go. The company reduced their staff by 25% because book sales were plummeting. And I feel like they would have dropped my book, but it had already printed. So they were like, all right, it's out. And so I didn't have a big budget behind it or anything. And they're surprised that 3 years later, I'm still ordering boxes of it and selling it.
Yeah.
And I'm having to explain to them part of my initial pitch when they approached me. I was like, well, this should be cool because I'm a comedian. I'm like always on a book tour. Most authors do a book tour the first 6 months and then they stop personally selling a lot of the books until they do their next book. Whereas I'm like, no, I'm going to keep selling this book. Keep those boxes ready. But my new book, What I Was Arrested For, will be published with a small publishing house called Clash Books. They're awesome. They just published In Defense of Ska, which is doing really, really well. Yeah, and I'm trying to, and a lot of other great stuff. I'm super excited to be working with them.
Oh, well, okay. So I'm happy you pulled the rug out from under me about the whole big publishing house, small publishing house. I'm glad that you found
I landed at a small publishing house, which, let's face it, is where I belong. But for the initial book, because punching Nazis was a hot topic for a minute, I tricked a big publishing house into taking a chance on me. Their mistake.
And 3 years later, you're still selling it strong.
Yeah, my first week back in a club, I was featuring for Chris Porter just last week and sold out a whole box of books, and it felt so good.
Yeah.
So Greg Proops advised me to write a book. He was like, yeah, people aren't really buying CDs and DVDs, and you seem like a guy who could write a book. So every time I empty another box, I'm like, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Saint Greg.
Nice. So you're hitting the stages once more, which must feel really good to be able to do that.
The first 2 or 3 times back on stage was awful. The lower capacity, people sitting far apart from each other. It's hard to get that laugh contagion going. I was really kind of despondent about it. And then I had this week with Chris Porter, and it was awesome. Yeah. And it was still only at 60% capacity, but we just killed. Chelsea Bierce opened, and all 3 of us murdered. Had really, really good sets night after night, show after show. We did a total of 6 shows. They added an early show on Saturday because it was selling so well.
So I have to say, 2020, you were on our online show a couple of times, and each time your daughter either just took over. I think the first time you had to dress something off stage, and she came and took over. Maybe you were running behind, and she just started it off. And I think the second time you came on, she had a lesser role, and I was kind of thinking, well, I wonder if Max is going to show up. But
of course, now you've heard her during this interview too.
Yes. And I didn't realize in doing my research, she has a Twitter account with some of the the crazy things that she says.
Right.
I'm wondering, is there a little part of you that, because you've obviously been in isolation with her, and I know I have a 14-year-old, and he's not necessarily the social butterfly, and I'm not looking at a situation where I could be doing a tour every weekend. But is there a little part of you that thinks, oh man, I've really enjoyed getting to be with my daughter like nonstop for the last year and a half, and if I go on the road, I'm going to miss out on cool moments like that? How do you, as a parent, as a dad, how are you dealing with that?
I think I spend more time hanging out with her than a lot of dads do with their kids normally. And I definitely changed the way I toured when I became a dad, because it used to be if I could get a gig in New York that paid for my ticket there and back, then I would go for 2 weeks. I would perform the gig, and then I would book a bunch of gigs around it that weren't going to pay for my ticket, because I'm like, when am I going to get a chance to be back and hit all these clubs?
Sure.
And I would stay out as long as I could. If I was going to go up to Seattle, I was going to hit every club on the way up, and at every club I could on the way, doing a different route back down again, know. And now I will literally fly up to Seattle, perform my 2 nights, and fly home. I've flown to New York and done 3 nights and came back. And these atheist events will fly me out, and I'll literally fly home the next day, which the atheist shows were said that was one of the first things where I was getting flown around the country. Believe it or not, in more red states, they actually have these atheist conventions and stuff, because being an atheist is more of a big deal and fun. I think in Austin and in Sacramento, it's like, oh, you're an atheist. You're on.
That makes
So
sense.
I was getting flown all over the country for that, and I would take advantage of it. When else am I going to get a chance to do some gigs in Lawrence, Kansas?
Yeah.
So that was cool. But now with a kid, I'm like, no, I want to get home. I want to get home and hang out with my kid. So it's definitely different. But I dream of the day that we can climb into the motorhome and go on tour, and her and mom can hang out while I go do gigs, and then I come back to them and sit around a campfire for a little bit before going to sleep.
Yeah.
that's like, that'll be the best when we can tour that way. But that's still a little ways off.
Yeah.
So, but I have to give her a shout out. I'm doing a bit on stage right now about Shakespeare saying all the world's a stage. And how that, I keep thinking that during this pandemic where I'm performing from my living room. And I talk about, I don't think Shakespeare ever had to perform from his kitchen.
Yeah.
And my daughter came up with Romeo, oh Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Romeo, I think you're muted. I think.
Oh.
And I killed with that all weekend. Her, and I'm so proud of her every time I tell that joke. I'm like, yeah, my writer gave me that one. My new 11-year-old writer.
Oh, that's so nice.
So yeah, it's cool being able to do jokes with her instead of just about her.
Yeah, and those little glimpses, and even just the fact that she's listening to what you're saying now. I mean, she may have moved on and thought, I'm bored. But
no, I don't hear Bluey playing in the background, so I'm pretty sure this is her entertainment for the hour.
Yeah, the impression that I got from her little mini appearances last year on our show, and the fact that she's listening to you. I mean, she loves Dad. She's very proud of Dad, which is a cool feeling.
Yeah, we do all right. We're peas in a pod, which is also why we can really butt heads too. But
yeah. Okay, well, we're going to start winding down. Is there something that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure people know about Keith Lowell Jensen?
Well, I mentioned that I have another book coming out.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting, and that should start taking pre-orders. Within a couple of months, I think. It's all edited. They're working on the cover art, and it'll definitely be out by, I think they said October or November.
Okay.
And that's what I was arrested for. Yeah, and it's all stories of me going to jail or otherwise having interactions with the cops. And it's more like Punching Nazis was a great experience, but it wasn't the book I wanted to write. It was the book they wanted me to write.
Yeah.
And now this one, it's almost completely just stories. So it's not interviews and essays. So I think there's like one, like the closing. But mostly it's me telling stories, which is what I do. And so I think it's a really fun book. I think people will enjoy it. And then other than that, Not For Rehire is still on Amazon. And if people can review it, that sure means a lot to me. And go support live comedy, especially people I won't say especially, your locals and people on the road. We all need your support. Hopefully you get to see us in one place hanging out together.
So one of the things that I'm doing with this vacation series is I am asking my guests to talk about or tell, got listeners from everywhere. Let's presume most of them are in Austin. Tell us why we should be paying attention to the Sacramento comedy scene, and who are some names that we should be paying attention to?
Oh, well, you had already mentioned Johnny Taylor. He's a Sacramentan who's all over the map right now, outperforming already. Man, he really hit the ground running.
He was not waiting. Yeah.
No. I'm treading slowly, tiptoeing into the water. Johnny's already swimming in the ocean. Ngaio Bealum is a much beloved local comedian who works with Doug Benson a lot. Tours with a lot of people, plays every weed festival and weed event in the country. Becky Lynn is a really very funny local who I love a lot, and I think is worth booking. Parker Newman is a young man who just cracks me up. Chazz Hawkins. Mikey Winfield is from Sacramento.
Oh, we know Mike.
I know him, but they don't know that he's from here. He is, and he stays here, even as he's getting work in LA. He might even have an apartment in LA, as far as I know. But he still has an apartment here. He's still a hometown guy. Kiry Shabazz is blowing up right now. he's a Sacramento guy who's super hilarious. I'll give you one last one. JR De Guzman.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm writing phonetically, but after the fact, I'll say, okay, how do you spell these names?
Yeah. I can email you the list.
Yeah.
I wish I'd put more women on the list, but my mind is blanking right now. I'll have to work on that. But yeah, we got Becky Lynn in there. She's super funny. And whatever woman is screaming right now hearing this because I should have named them and didn't, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And give us a high level reason why we should all be paying attention to the Sacramento scene.
I feel like we have a certain voice that's developed in Sacramento where, and this isn't true of everyone in Sacramento or even everyone on my list, but the Sacramento voice, we're not yelling at you and telegraphing the jokes in as much. I feel like there's kind of a mellower, laid back style happening in Sacramento that I really like. So and like I said, we lived in the shadow of San Francisco for a long time. They called us Hacramento. And now, even within the San Francisco scene, when you look at the people that are performing, Sacramento comedians are dominating. Like, I don't know what magic came together here, but we gave the world Death Grips and the Deftones and Cake and a whole bunch of really good comics. So, I mean, even as I was reading that list to you, a few of those names are becoming national names, but are still based out of here. And that's really cool.
Yeah. Awesome.
It's neat when someone isn't from Sacramento, but they made it in LA or they made it in New York. It's really neat when they're making it and they're still in Sacramento.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like that's a kind of cool accomplishment.
Yep. Agreed. Same here, I think. It's good to have our hometown heroes stay home.
Isn't it? Yeah. Well, that's, I'm a big fan of Ian MacKay of Minor Threat. And I love that his label will only sign local DC artists. He's like, start a label in your town. Yeah. And your town's always going to suck if everyone good leaves. You know? So,
that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah. All right. Well, before I do my official closing, I have one more question for you, Keith. Are you ready?
I'm going to try and make this. This will be a good closer.
Okay.
I got to nail it. There's a lot of pressure.
All right. One word to describe your future.
Oh, damn you. Terrifying. Which that's my word to describe everyone's future right now. Oh my God. The precipice we find ourselves on.
But in the face of some fails and challenges, you always work to convert that to a win. So
I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do anything about climate change to make it a win.
You're doing your part.
We're in the middle of a hell of a heat wave here in Sacramento, and it's ugly.
Yeah, that's an April for us here in Central Texas.
Yeah,
it's tough, but I do see you doing your part. I follow you on Instagram and Facebook, and you're a vegan and you farm. So I see the fruits right now. You're in a fig phase, so It's very much fruits of your labor.
Yeah. I'm gonna go harvest some loquats today.
Very cool. All right. Well, that is a wrap on. Oh, by the way. Oh, well, we'll promote this in this next little part. That podcast. That is a wrap on Comedy Wham Presents Keith Lowell Jensen. Tell us where we can find you on social media and let us know about your upcoming shows, projects, and please say the name of your podcast, Keith.
Well, I'm at Keith Lowell on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, just about everywhere. And then Facebook, of course, I'm just Keith Lowell Jensen. I have a fan page and a regular page. My podcast is Keith Lowell Jensen Presents The Keith Lowell Jensen Show with Keith Lowell Jensen. And that's the shorter version. It was going to be Keith Lowell Jensen Presents The Keith Lowell Jensen Show with Keith Lowell Jensen for all your Keith Lowell Jensen needs. So yeah, we cut it down a little bit. So
thank goodness.
On a letterhead. And I'm super proud of the podcast. And we actually have a special Father's Day episode coming out tonight at midnight where I interview my dad, and he's got some good stories, and it's fun. So maybe next Father's Day I'll let Max interview me. We'll see what happens. So yeah, but I really wanted to not just limit that to another comedian interviewing his comedian friends. So I have some of my favorite, like Anton Barbeau is a great singer-songwriter that I like. I've had Wendy and Richard Pinney, who created the comic book Elf Quest. Keith Knight, who the TV show Woke is based on Keith's comics, and he's a consultant and writer on the show. So yeah, we've had really good guests, a lot of comic book folks, a lot of video game folks, and some comedians.
Very cool. Yeah, not narrow casted like Comedy Wham, where we just talk to comics.
So, no offense at all.
Yeah, I know.
I just, like, my life is centered around comedy, and I was like, I want to go talk to people in some of these other disciplines that I admire so much and secretly wish that I could also work in.
Yeah, very cool. All right, well, we hope you've enjoyed learning about how Keith Lowell Jensen got to be the comedic genius that you heard today, just as much as I had. This has been Comedy Wham Presents Keith Lowell Jensen. I'm Valerie, and that's been funny. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.